Today is July 19th, 2023. My name is Kevin,
And my name is Advika.
and we're with the Houston Asian American Archive. We're talking today with Representative Wu about Senate Bill 147, which was proposed last year but recently died. And if passed, it would have introduced an alien land law that targeted countries such as China, Iran, and Russia. So thanks so much for talking with us today.
Thanks for having me.
So to get some of your perspectives and thoughts on the bill, we'd just like to first ask, for those viewing this video who are perhaps not as familiar with this bill, could you briefly kind of summarize the bill and the reason why it was so problematic?
Sure. In Texas, it's called SB 147, but this bill is showing up in probably most of the states, especially Republican-controlled states. The numbers are different in other places, but they all do basically the same thing. This is our new form of yellow peril, where people are scared of whatever issues they have with China and other places, but they're imposing it onto Americans, American citizens, American immigrants, but all the people who of basically Asian ancestry are going to feel this. Asian ancestry are going to suffer from this, because what these laws do is create a state-sanctioned discrimination against Asian Americans for land ownership. And usually these are said like, well, it's, they list out China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. But in reality, if you listen to them talk, it's only about China. The problem is that really have like strong feelings one way or the other, how the US interacts with China. But the problem is when you want to deal with China, but you impose that on Chinese Americans. That's where our issue is. And this law, what it does is it basically just says, if you're these class of people, you can't buy land, you can't own property. And in many places like Texas, that extends to mineral wealth, including oil and gas, including things that you might grow on the land. And there's just no reason for it. It's ginned up fear, and it's directed at the wrong target.
So, as a state representative, but also kind of reflecting on your own immigrant experience, could you comment on why opposing this bill meant so much to you personally?
Yeah. So, at a really fundamental level, this is my story. Like what this bill does is it's the story of every Asian American who's ever come to this country. And most of our community, most of the population are recent immigrants that have came here in around the 80s and 90s. There's a few that are families that are older than that, been here longer, but most of our stories involve coming from China, coming from Taiwan, coming from Korea, wherever it is, having very little, studying, working, saving, buying that first home, buying that first business, and building your career, building your business empire, whatever it is. Every single Asian American can resonate with this story instantly, because it's either the story of you or the story of your parents or the story of your grandparents. Being able to buy into the American dream is kind of our thing. And when you tell Asian Americans, we're going to cut this off for everyone else, including people who are here right now, who have been here for a long time, that's very frightening. It makes our community a target of not only state-sanctioned discrimination, but it invites external discrimination. It invites people who already have hate in their heart to do it. Because essentially what this is it's a green light from the government to say, hey, those people that you're scared of, we're scared of them too. And to be people who are not quite right in the head, people who already are filled with hate, they're going to take that and say, I can hear what you're saying. I can read between the lines. I'm going to go buy some more guns and I'll take care of this myself. Right? And that's the really scary part.
So, Colkhurst, who proposed the bill, cites these adversarial countries, China, Iran, etc. So, what do you think people like Colkhurst are afraid of in terms of foreign land purchases and national security?
Yeah, so this is an interesting question, right? So, realistically, legitimately, China is an adversarial nation, and we have strong national security interests when in dealing with China. But guess what? The state legislature knows nothing about national security, only what they imagine in their minds and what they saw on YouTube. That's about it, right? Because there's no NSA here, there's no CIA, there's no FBI, there's no Secret Service, there's no military intelligence, there's no DOJ. What is their information from? What are they basing their fears and concerns out of? Well, they're watching Fox News. They're watching stuff on YouTube. They're reading Twitter. Great. None of those are reliable sources of information to make national security decisions. And that's the really frustrating part, because this takes away from legitimate discussions of national security, right? When you spend all your time doing this hokey little thing that does actually nothing, then you waste all that time and effort, and people aren't paying attention to the actual dangers. So look, foreign governments own a lot of US land. In fact, foreign governments own about 1% of the total purchasable land in the United States, 1%. And out of that 1%, China owns less than 1%. Okay, the rest of the land is owned by, rest of the foreign owned land is owned by Canada, Mexico, and European countries. But we don't seem to have a problem with them, right? So this is more politics than it is policy. Just like anti-trans legislation, just like anti-LGBT legislation, just anti-CRT legislation, anti-DEI legislation, like all of those things, the enemy and the danger is perception. And it's what's been ginned up in politics to sell in the Republican primary or whatever else it is. There are legitimate issues with China, but attacking Chinese Americans makes no sense at all.
So to those that are still, I guess, scared of or concerned about national security, you mentioned some actual dangers, but what are some more appropriate ways to combat national security threats that don't, involve vilifying a whole group of people?
Yeah, so one of the biggest issues outside of the, unconstitutional discrimination against our community, one of the biggest issues is simply you cannot have 50 states with 50 different policies where immigrants from state to state do not know what their rights are by moving across state lines. It's simply, you can't manage that. It just causes mass confusion. And look, Texas, of all places, is a huge investment point for Asian companies, not just from China, but from Taiwan, from Japan, from Korea, from all over the Eastern Hemisphere. And it's not going to be just Chinese companies who say, you know what, we don't want to be here. We don't need this. We don't need to deal with this. It's going to be all the Asian companies as well, because they don't know if they're going to be next. And as much as you want to reassure them, there's not a good way to do this. The right way to do this, if you want to address this in the right way, it should be done at a federal level, right? Because the federal government has constitutional purview over immigration. And so you should have the federal government decide what the rights of immigrants are in this country, right? And also the US Constitution. But look, there are already organizations in the federal system that deal with this, including a group called CFIUS. It's the Committee on Foreign Investments in the United States. And their entire job is to vet high dollar investments in the U.S. from countries that we're concerned about, right? That's their entire reason for existence. And they have access to the FBI, they have access to the CIA, they have access to military intelligence and all these different things. They can actually make national security decisions, right? And that actually makes sense. If you want to do something about it, beef up CFIUS, give them more money, give them more resources, increase their purview, make more people have to send their investments through this filter. Let the people who actually know what they're doing and have the tools and resources to do that job, do the job. That's it. I mean, it is absolutely absurd to think that the state of Louisiana, who can barely keep running water and streets open, that they're going to do national intelligence assessments. Okay. It is mind-blowingly stupid.
You touched on this previously, but beyond promoting anti-Asian sentiment and this sort of us versus them mentality, what are some other broader social consequences of this bill that extends beyond just the Asian American population?
Well, I mean, wait. Before I move outside of the Asian population, let me just talk about this one more thing. Okay. And I think fundamentally at the core of this issue, we still return to the same old problem for Asian Americans. And that is one simple thing, that the stereotype, the racial stereotype against Asian Americans is that Asian Americans are never truly Americans. And Asian Americans have dealt with this problem from the day there was such a thing as an Asian American. And this whole idea is what it provides the foundation for this type of law and all the other laws that discriminated against Asian Americans in the past, right? This idea that Asians can never fully integrate into the society. We can never fully be a part of American society. We can never fully be American. We can never be trusted to be loyal citizens. We can never be given the opportunity to fully ingrain ourselves into the society, and we have to be kept at arm's length. And we saw this back in the 1800s when they passed very clear laws saying Chinese and Japanese people cannot own businesses, they cannot get married, they're not allowed to have children. We saw that in the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, right? To say these people, we don't like these kind of people, right? We'll tolerate the Black people, we'll tolerate the Mexicans, but there's something really different about those people with yellow skin and slanty eyes, right? There's something animalistic about them. We don't trust them. They're loyal to their home governments. And then fast forward to the late 1800s, early 1900s, states are passing anti-alien land laws, the same exact laws that we're talking about right now, right? Chinese people, Japanese people cannot purchase property. Why do they do that? You know, the reasons given in Texas. Texas passed its laws when Chinese immigrants moved to South Texas to start farming because they were farmers and that's all they knew how to do. And in response, the community said, these people, we don't really trust them. We don't really think they can become Americans. They can't really, their food is too weird. They talk strange. And I mean, just look at them. And they said, it's better policy for us to keep them out of our community than risk any kind of future danger. And so they passed Texas's alien land law right about 100 years ago that said Chinese people, Japanese people are not allowed to purchase land in the state of Texas. Fast forward to World War II. We have one side of the country where the US government looks at one side of the country and says, well, obviously German Americans are loyal Americans. They're real Americans. And we don't have any concerns about them. And so only about 10,000 German nationals, German citizens, were rounded up during World War II. And the government looked at the other side of the country and looked at all the people with the yellow skin and slanty eyes and said, there's something inherently different about these people. There's something we don't trust. There's something un-American about them. We don't think they can fully integrate into our society. We don't really think that they're Americans. And so the American government rounded up 120,000 plus Japanese Americans, 2/3 of whom were natural-born US citizens. Why this discrimination? Why this disparity? Right? You want to go forward to Vincent Chen, right? Where we have issues with Japan, people are upset, and they don't bother caring if somebody's actually Japanese. Vincent Chen was a convenient target. He looked Japanese enough. And it's okay to go after him because he's not really an American. Asians can't really be Americans, right? And they're not really part of our society. It's okay to beat them up. It's okay to attack them. We wouldn't attack one of our neighbors. But Asian Americans aren't really Americans. And here we are in 2023, and we have laws across the state, across the nation, that affect the rights of Chinese Americans and Asian Americans in general. And people say, what's the big deal? national security is really important. I mean, we don't really trust these people kind of in the first place because, I mean, just look at them. Look at the way they look. Look at the way they talk. Look at the weird food that they eat. They can't really be Americans. And we pass these laws. So this is where we are. And we can't fight these laws and fight the other things that will continue to happen to our community and continue to repeat in history until we deal with this concept, this racist concept that Asians can never truly be American. And that is the real fight, right? It's not just this law. If it's not this law, it'll be another law. If it's not that law, it'll be something that happens in society. And we have to fight back on this concept that we would not accept this as a racial stereotype for any other group, right? If you just made broad, sweeping stereotypes about African Americans, Latinos, women, LGBT, you would get blasted. But somehow to say that, well, I think all Asian immigrants are suspect. That's okay. That's okay to say, because that's what these bills are, right? To say that all Asian Americans are just inherently suspect, right? Without regard to what they've done individually. And so here we are over 100 years later, still fighting the same battle. And I, for one, would like to finally win this war. I'm tired of fighting this. And what I want is for Asian Americans, number one, to stop playing up the myth of the model minority. And I know this is not y'all, but this is our parents, right? Our parents do this. It's like, oh, we're the good ones. And it doesn't matter if you're East Asian, South Asian, or whatever it is. It happens across our community to say like, oh, honey, we're the good ones. We don't protest. We don't scream and yell. We just work hard, and we just keep our heads down, and we suffer. Well, the problem with that is, you know what Americans do when they get upset? They scream and they yell and they protest, right? And they don't sit there quietly and just work hard while they're being discriminated against. 200 years of this nation's history is Americans being pissed off and fighting back. And if we want our community to be accepted as Americans, we have to start acting like Americans. Americans are not quiet. Americans are loud, and we're obnoxious, and we will scream and yell and shout until we get what we want. And that's what we have to do. And before we have any other discussions about other people, we have to address our own community. We have to stop our own parents from repeating those same racist stereotypes that they think benefits us, but ends up hurting us in the long run, right? And I'm not going to get too deep in this, but like when we say Asian Americans, oh, they're good workers, they're good at math, they're so hardworking, they're so stoic. It also means that Asian Americans aren't going to be good leaders. We're not going to be good for other jobs. Well, just keep them as workers. They don't need to be manager. They don't need a promotion. Just keep them working. They're happy. They don't complain, right? And so we kind of have screwed ourselves by perpetuating this. And I can come up for another interview if you ever want to go more in depth about that. But look, I know it sounds like a long jump to go from myth of the model minority to alien land laws, but that's what it is, right? This concept that Asian Americans are never truly Americans, we cannot trust them, is how we get to a law that says, well, we're going to flag all immigrants from these Asian countries as suspect because we don't trust them. Right. I'm sorry, I kind of like overrode your question.
No worries, no worries. So you mentioned this very long and upsetting lineage of anti-Asian legislation, throughout the years. And even today, we have this just widespread across state borders, across many states. So I guess my first question is, do you foresee this pattern of legislation supporting kind of this anti-Asian or anti-foreign nation adversarial country sort of legislation continuing in the future. And it seems that in recent years, I guess this goes into my second question, in recent years, there's been a great uptick in it, whether that be due to the pandemic or
Yes.
otherwise. I guess, why do you think that is? I guess, are there
Yeah.
some concrete causes beyond just long
So
term? Yeah.
I get your question. So let me start off with this. Like, would you agree with me if I said our relationship with China right now is just as bad as it's ever been? Right? Would that be a fair statement? Like, I don't think it's better than it used to be, and I don't think it's really worse than it used to be. Like, our relationship with China is just as bad as it's always been. Like, under Obama, China knocked down a spy plane. That was a big hassle. There's, other administrations, people caught Chinese spies, they caught US spies, whatever it is. Relationships between US and China have always been like not awesome, right? And sometimes bad, right? And that's not, nothing's really changed about that, right? But the temperature is about where it is, it's always been. So what's the difference? Well, the difference, and again, I want to preface this by saying that, look, I'm a politician. I look at things through a political lens, and so that's my caveat on my take on this. Okay, so I think two main factors affect this. One is COVID, right? And I think COVID was more of a catalyst and sped things up more than anything else, but I don't think that's the main driver. But one of the things I've talked about repeatedly is that the United States goes through these periodic waves of anti-immigrant, anti-Asian sentiment, right? And we've seen this, like 1800s, the mid 1800s have one wave, then you come in 1882 and alien land laws is another wave. You head off to World War II, that's another wave. You head into the 1970s and that's another wave. And then now you are here 30, 40, 50 years later in 2023. And it started a little bit earlier than that, but another wave of anti-immigrant, anti-Asian sentiment. All right? And these things like kind of come and go. But overall, right, nothing has really changed. But now, because of COVID, people already have this sort of like anti-China, anti-Asian feeling that is now exploitable. And it's already where the wave already started forming. And what this legislation really does is it just rides this wave, right? Because and again, I'm a partisan, I'm a Democrat, so I'm biased on this. But my perspective is the Republican Party always finds groups of people to make enemies, to make into monsters, to say, look at them, those are monsters, you should be scared of them. And they did this for LGBT. They did this against Muslim Americans. They're now doing it against the trans community. They're doing it against DEI and all this other stuff, saying, look at all these Black people trying to take stuff away from you, right? And they're creating monsters out of people who are sometimes misunderstood and require maybe a little more sympathy. Maybe probably a lot of people in the Republican sphere don't even know any Asian Americans, don't know any Chinese people, right? Or they've taken great pains to not know them. And so the Asian community has always been an easy mark because our community is small, it's often misunderstood. It's easy to make up stuff about our population because most people just don't know a lot of the Asians and say, well, Chinese people eat babies. And like half the people go, oh, that's really stupid. Yeah. And then Senator goes, really? And that's where it kind of starts, right? Because you don't, like, back before the equality movement for the LGBTQ community, people say like, oh, gay people, you don't know any gay people. And people start spreading all these things about what gay people do and how scary they are and all these other things. But it changed when people actually started meeting gay people. Gay people started coming out and saying, hey, I'm gay. You've known me for years. What's the problem? Right? But still, for Asian Americans, we're mostly centered around large population centers, right? So there's a lot of our country who's probably never even met an Asian American, right? It's only recently that Asian Americans have gotten into mainstream media, right? Joy Luck Club, well, was a long time ago and it kind of bombed. But we didn't have like Asians in contemporary mainstream media for a long time, right? And with the advent of Crazy Rich Asians and all this other stuff, Shang-Chi, and right, for the first time, Asian Americans are seen as contemporary. But it hasn't been that long. There's plenty of people out there who like who still hate gay people. So it's easy to ride this wave. And part of the problem is, as I complain about all the time, is our community is pretty quiet about it when this wave comes. And we kind of just say, well, we'll just suffer quietly and we'll work hard and we'll move on. And that is not the right way to handle it. And we can't keep handling it that way because these waves will keep coming and coming. We're, in short, the Asian community is an easy target. This is happening because we're an easy target. We're an easy punching bag, right?
So a couple more questions before I pass the baton to Advika. So what do you say then to the people interested in immigrating to the States, or who have family that are interested in immigrating to the States, who are maybe perhaps discouraged by the current social climate in the US? Can and should immigrants stay optimistic about this American dream?
I'm not sure what to say to them. I don't think I need to say anything to them because they are all paying attention. We've had a number of people come to us and said, look, we were about to close this deal with the companies that's going to make a multi-million-dollar investment or even billion-dollar investment, and they're pulling out. Because even though the law didn't pass, they don't want to risk it. They said, like, if you're going to pass this kind of law, even think about it, then this is not a right environment. Why would we sink hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars, into a place that in 2 years, we may not know that we can still run our business? Why would you do that? Why wouldn't you go to California or New York or Chicago or some other place that doesn't have these type of like inclinations? And this is what I've said from the very beginning. The danger of this legislation has already been done, right? Even if you don't pass this law, the message has been sent. And it's not a message to the Chinese government. Chinese government could not give a shit, right? The message is for the people who actually listen to this stuff, and it's businesses. It's people who are considering what state to settle in after they finish their PhD in robotics, or PhD or their master's degree in mathematics and physics, right? And my concern, right now in the hard sciences, hard sciences of mathematics, physics, chemistry, something like 80 to 90% of the graduate level students, especially PhD students in those fields, are not US born. They're mainly coming from China and India and other parts of Asia. And if we're saying to people that we desperately need to maintain the dominance of our economy, to maintain our innovative tech field, if we want to maintain those things, but all of our master's degrees and PhDs are saying, you know what, screw it. I can go make money in China. I can go make money in India. Why do I need to stay somewhere where they're telling me openly that I'm not wanted and I might be in physical danger? Why would you stay? I mean, we had people who that were interviewed around here in Texas who said, like, look, if this law had been passed or even considered passing 10 years ago when they were trying to deciding where to settle, they simply wouldn't have come here. I guarantee you this law has already had an effect, right? And the fact that it didn't pass doesn't matter. If it passed, it would have been much worse. But this sends a very clear statement. Look at Florida, right? Look at not just their alien land law, but look at the Florida show me your papers bill, right? And a bill that even its most ardent supporters say, well, we didn't really mean it. It was meant as a message. It was just politics. It doesn't matter. It's politics to you, but it's life and death for us. And we're not going to go be somewhere where the government says we're openly hostile to you. And I'm fearful not just for the state. I'm fearful for our country. Because once we lose the diversity and once we stop attracting the best and the brightest from around the world, when they no longer see this place as a land of opportunity, when they no longer see America as a defender of freedom, they'll go somewhere else, right? It's a global economy. So, sorry, I wish it wasn't more depressing.
No, thanks for sharing that. I think that's all the questions I have from me. So Advika has some more questions for you.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. I just want to ask a little bit about your current involvement in the issue. So, despite the bill aiming at banning property ownership by citizens of China and 3 other countries, you saw support amongst Asians, African Americans, and others denouncing the measure. What hope do you see in coalitions and support like this across minority groups of diverse racial backgrounds?
This is a great question, but I have to. I'm
Oh,
sorry.
go ahead. No,
This is a
go
great
ahead.
question, and but I have to correct one thing. Okay. I would really like for everyone, when we talk about this, not to say citizens of other countries, but this affects immigrants to our country, right? Under US immigration law, every single immigrant, no matter how long you've been here, no matter what your status is, you are a citizen of another country until the very day that you are sworn in as a US citizen. And your citizenship doesn't drop off until that day. And in fact, if you're an Iranian citizen, your citizenship in Iran does not drop off at all, because your Iranian citizenship is a function of your parentage, not of your U.S. citizenship, right? Most Iranians, if they're recent immigrants, are dual citizens. And so I want to make sure that our discussion is not, we don't label people as, well, you're just citizens of those countries. No, these are immigrants in our country. These are Americans. Right? These are people who have chosen to get a visa to study here, to invest, or to be a permanent citizen. These are green card holders. These are people on their pathway to citizenship. Okay. So that being said, I am very proud of the coalition that has formed up to help fight against this law, right? From the very beginning, the moment we found out about the Texas bill, we called all these different groups, and immediately the Black community was the first to step up, right? And of all the groups, and Asian community and Black community do not have good relationships, right? And we're trying to fix that. And this is one of the ways to fix it. And the Black community immediately came in and said, we will support you in this. We will defend you against this, because you know what? They've done this to us. They've done this to us. They've redlined us. They've used land purchasing policies to hurt our community. They've done this to us. We don't want it to do to you, right? And immediately, Latino communities came in and said the same thing. LULAC, NALEO, people are with us because they said, we understand, because they've done it to us too. The Jewish community, the Muslim community also immediately stepped in, because of all the groups, they understand what it's like to be singled out for things, and use this type of policy against them. Now, you want the irony of this legislation? The Texas legislature passed the bill just last session, just 2 years ago, SB 30, that created a way for people to remove their racist deed restrictions that have been on the books since like the 1950s and 60s or whatever it was. The restrictions said, well, this land can't be sold to Black people, can't be sold to Latinos, and can't be sold to Jews. And sometimes they said no Chinamen either. Like, we created a pathway to remove those deed restrictions that have been in those deeds for like 100 years. And to come back the next session and say, we're going to reinstate all those things. is just absurd. So look, civil rights is an ongoing fight. It is, as we have seen time and time again. I mean, the Asian community has already dealt with the alien land laws. We fought those in court and won. And to have to come back like 100 years later and do the exact same thing is just, it's so disrespectful. Like, I mean, come on, guys, we're worth a new type of discrimination. At least come at us with something new, right? But the fact that all these different communities immediately saw themselves in what they were trying to do is proof that the fight for civil rights is an ongoing battle and that we cannot do it alone, that we have to join, that outside of this, the Asian community needs to join with the African-American community and fight for Black rights. We need to join with the Latino community. We need to join with the Jewish community. We need to join with the Muslim community. We need to join with the LGBTQ community and saying, when you lose rights, we lose rights. And I tried to explain this to the Asian community back when Trump did the Muslim ban. I said, we got to protest this. You got to be out and protest this. And a lot of Chinese people were like, I'm not Muslim. I'm Chinese. I'm not Middle Eastern looking. I'm not worried about it. And I always said to them, like, it's not your name yet, but one day it will be. And that came to fruition not even a decade later, right? Not even 10 years passed before I was proven right again. So if there's anything that I could ask people to take away from watching this, I would say two things. One, Asian Americans can no longer be quiet. If we're quiet, that's going to be our end. Silence equals death. And the second thing is, we have to be a part of a bigger picture. We can't just fight for ourselves where there's not enough of us. We have to have other people behind us. And in order for other people to be behind us, we have to be behind them. So, you know, when we have discussions about Black Lives Matter, when we have discussions about fighting anti-trans issues, when we have discussions about anti-Semitism, Asian Americans need to voluntarily step up to the table and say, we're with you. We have seen the discrimination against us, and it is just as awful as the discrimination against you. So I hope that our community will learn from this and will learn to fight and learn to fight for others as well.
Okay, thank you. You'd said earlier that the federal government should take on national security and immigration issues. What role did the federal government play in this whole battle? Did they have any control over this law at all?
Absolutely not. I mean, I think if the federal government had anything to say, they would say like, hey, why are you guys messing with this? You guys have no idea what you're doing. You're going to ruin things. You know, the irony is, shouldn't be lost that even though these laws are directed at like the Chinese government really doesn't care. Most of the Chinese government and any foreign government, their right to purchase land and their right to do and make acquisitions is based off of like U.S. treaties that override any state law. Like, you know, foreign governments that are affected by this, like just look at like state law versus national treaty. What takes precedence? Like, well, you know, you can decide for yourself. And it's just, I don't know. It's laughable. It would be funny if it wasn't so cruel. That's it. I mean, and I think I have to reiterate what I said at the beginning is this type of law is waving a knife in front of the neck of the American dream for our community, right? This is how we all got here. This is the story of the Asian American experience. Coming to this country, working hard, buying property. That's how we're here today. That's how I'm standing in front of you, that my parents did that. That's how you're on your Zoom, because your parents did that. And to say we're going to cut that off is not just cruel, but it's openly offensive to every single Asian American who's poured blood, sweat, and tears into building this country.
So, talking about actively battling this bill, there have been rallies opposing this bill in many major cities of Texas. How effective do you think this was, and what are your next steps regarding this issue, even though the bill has died?
Well, one of the big issues is now we're afraid the bill is going to come back. We kind of always knew that the bill would come back next session, but now is the concern is the bill would be set on the special session, and probably later on this fall. And bills are easier to pass on during special sessions because the attention is more focused. But while people in the community say, "Hey, Gene Wu, help kill this bill," I didn't really do much of anything, right? It wasn't me. I didn't bring like 1,000 people to come protest. The community did that, right? I didn't bring 120 witnesses, like a historic number of Asian Americans to come testify against the bill. The community did that, right? I wasn't the one who made thousands of phone calls, text messages, emails, social media posts. I didn't do that. That was the community. And I keep saying it again and again, I'm extremely, extremely proud of what our community has done and what communities around the nations have gotten together to do. Now, while other places weren't successful in defending against it, we were for now. But whether this stuff moves forward or not is going to be on our community. That our community that has been silent so long, when we come out and finally scream and shout, people actually listen. And I think that's an important message for the community to learn is your voice actually does matter. Like you have a voice and you can use it and it matters and people listen to it. And we have to keep doing it. And if there was a greater call for our community to register to vote, to get out and vote, to support people who defended us, to vote against people who attacked us, if there was not a greater reason to do that now, I don't know what it is. Right? This is our existential crisis. Because it will never end at just these laws. If they had passed this law this session, guess what? They would have come back with another law, an even more extreme law next session. Until the community swats them on the nose with a rolled up newspaper and say no, it'll keep happening again and again and again because silence is acceptance. Silence is acquiescence, whatever you want to call it.
Let's say, like, God forbid, this law is passed in the special session. What can or should citizens do afterwards? Is there anything they can do?
I mean, just like Florida, Florida passed its law just a couple of months ago, and many Asian groups immediately immediately filed suit in federal court. The court actually had one of its first hearings, I think, yesterday or the day before, and we would need to do the same thing. Right. But granted that we're in the Fifth Circuit and that's not always that hopeful. But it's something that our community must do. And even before this law passes, what I want us to do is be organized. We should have more organization within the Asian community. Texas is a big place. There's lots of big cities. I'm really familiar with Houston. I know the Dallas people kind of well. I don't know any Asian people in Fort Worth. I know more than a handful of Asian people in San Antonio and, a handful in Austin. We can't do that. These are huge Asian communities. We have to unite everyone. There have to be groups within those cities, and we have to have a national or a state level group that unites all these groups together. And I really want to call on our brethren, our colleagues within the Asian community, within the Pan-Asian diaspora, right? We need our South Asian friends to join us. We need our Vietnamese friends who say like, well, this doesn't affect us, I'm not Chinese. We need you to join us too, right? We need everyone to join because, like I said, you know, this isn't going to just affect Chinese people. This is going to affect all Asians. Because when this law goes into effect, when the laws around the nation go into effect, people who are looking to comply with the law, they're not going to just say, oh, I know the difference between Chinese people and Taiwanese people and Japanese people and Koreans and whoever else. They're going to say, well, everybody, you know, if I'm selling this property, everybody with yellow skin and slanty eyes, don't bother coming in. We don't know what your immigration status is. We don't know where you're from. It's easier policy to say, no Asians. That's going to be the reason why other Asian communities need to join us. Just like the, you know, like during COVID, the attack at the Sam's Club in Odessa, right? A man walked into a Sam's Club and started stabbing an entire family, a husband, the father, the child, everybody. And all the while screaming anti-Chinese slogans, catchphrases, whatever you want to call them. And the family was Burmese. And like most Asian people we would never mistake Burmese for Chinese. It's like completely different parts of the world. They look nothing alike. But to most non-Asians, they don't know to tell the difference. And more importantly, they don't care. Just like Vincent Chen was not Japanese, but it didn't matter. Asian is Asian. And one target is as good as another. And that's the real danger. That's the real fear. And just like talking about the Muslim ban and Chinese Americans basically saying we don't care, if other Asian communities say we don't care, it's still going to affect you. It's still going to come after you. You're just Asian. Nobody outside of your own community cares what kind of Asian you are, right? For the rest of America, for people who are filled with hate, Asian is Asian. One is as good as another. So, you know, we need to push back on this.
How do you think this issue regarding alien land laws and anti-Asian sentiment is going to be played out based on who wins the White House in 2024?
I think if we have somebody in the White House who understands that intentional discrimination is wrong, they could at least be a backstop to any type of legislation that goes too far. You know, we're asking for the federal government, we're asking for our members of Congress to support a law that overrides all of these state laws, right? Preempts all the state laws. But how they do it and what kind of restrictions they do actually put in place, we still don't know, right? And that could be a real danger and pitfall in itself. And you know, they come back and say, like, look, all Chinese investments must be must be vetted through CFIUS, or otherwise the FBI will get involved. Great, fine, don't care, right? But if the federal government itself starts putting in saying like, well, Chinese visa holders can't buy land, or green card holders can't own this type of thing, then we have real problems, right? And then we say like, no, that's just this. It's just the same discrimination. You're just doing it on a federal level, right? And I'm hoping, look, if it's Biden who has Asian Americans in his cabinet, who listens to the Asian American community and respects our community, versus one of the Republican candidates who has openly said, you know, Governor DeSantis, who passed the Florida law, right? Or Donald Trump, who's done all this crazy shit in the past and has been very carefree about the discrimination. You know, this is an easy decision.
Okay, thank you. Can we just ask a few questions about your experiences as a representative?
It's been a long, strange journey, and it's been difficult being a minority within the minority, and at the same time trying to defend the Asian community and do all this other stuff. It's been rewarding at times. It's been very frustrating at times. You can't really see it in the video, but I think I have quite a few more gray hairs after this year. But I really hope that more young Asian Americans decide that you don't have to listen to your parents and go to law school or go to med school. That you or you can go do the things, but you can still run for office. Right. And because if there's no Asians in office, then there's no one to defend us. So, I hope that the young people can find their voice. I hope young people can realize that we can't just rely on our parents to do what's needed to be done. And sometimes we have to pick up the mantle and say, Mom and Dad, I'm going to protect you. That's it.